Welcome and congratulations
Thanks very much.
on a great season. By the way, do you remember the last time I interviewed you?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Should we tell these people where it was?
Sure.
Not to be too name dropping.
Well, it might never happen again, so you might as well drop it when you can.
It was in the White House. and it was in my previous life as editor of Glamour. We were privileged to have Sarah Jessica on the cover 3 times, but the most recent time was alongside then First Lady Michelle Obama. So I had the opportunity to interview both of them
and
together.
Kerry Washington.
And
I think.
Kerry Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a day one shall never forget. One might long for that day again. Anyway. Nice to see you
as
again.
we were saying.
In an equally wonderful, established,
we were on
fine, institutional house of entertainment and good company.
And gravitas.
Yes.
Well, I want to start off since the audience has just seen that wonderful last episode, and I was just saying as we were walking up how happy I was at the way it ended and the amount of sort of joy there was there for Frances. But I'm curious about what it's like to prepare for a season 2 of a show like that versus a season 1. How do you get into character? Do you think consciously about how am I going to evolve her now, or is it more organic than that?
I think we thought a lot about story. Circumstances were a bit unusual in that we had one writing team and then it changed, and so time was collapsed and we had a really short period in which to put together an entire season of television, and that just means the perfunctory stuff like putting together a writing room and getting scripts. So we spent a lot of time, Jenny Bix came on board, which was a huge treat for us. Wasn't even my idea. I can't take any credit, but the studio said, what about Jenny? And I just would assume that she would be spoken for. But she graciously stepped in with a lot of energy and skill and put together a writing room, which included some of our former writers from Sex and the City also. And then we just spent a lot of time talking about what we felt was important from the season before. You can't shoot a season of television and dismiss what happened. It's meaningful not just to me and to Thomas and Molly and Talia and Tracy, but also, audiences, there's a lot to choose from. And if they invest time and money in a relationship, you really owe it to them to honor the details that everybody worked really hard to create. So those are big, interesting, complicated conversations. You're putting together a season of television with people who are new to the characters, and so we worked a lot on that. And then at a certain point, I think if you're fortunate enough to get to play a character for a while, once the stories start surfacing, you're really there. You just need the words to remind you, what fragrance she wore and if
What
she likes
fragrance
oatmeal.
did she wear?
Oh, she wears this weird fragrance. It's really true. She does.
Really?
Yeah. It's from what's that great Italian company? Anyway. But like all the little things that make people human and interesting. And so the story was obviously the most important thing. But once that starts peeking its head up, you start recalling it pretty quickly. It's muscle memory in some ways.
As someone who doesn't work in TV or acting in any way, I know nothing about the television process, and I'm curious about what it's actually like when you're working on a series. Like, once you're, not in your sort of producer role, but in your role as an actor, when do you get a script for the next episode? How long do you have with it? If there are notes you want to give back to the writers, are you texting them? Are you calling them? Is there a meeting? How does it work?
I think, you can look at, if you've seen one television series and the way it functions, that living organism, you've seen one. Because all of them are different. I mean, typically, in an ideal world, the actors have the script at least, there's a table read. You guys are probably familiar with this process. So there's a table read. Ideally, it's about a week before you start shooting. That gives all production the time they need, location and production design and all the people who are sort of the advanced team, right, to make sure everything's there when you show up on a set. And that also gives the writers, the showrunner and the writer of that episode, time to hear notes from the studio, hear some notes from actors, producers, and go back and make those adjustments. Most actors like to have a script at least 2 or 3 days before the scene they're shooting. It's nice if you can have a whole script that you feel is fairly reliable, because even if you have scenes, if there's a lot of changes, and you guys know this, if you've already shot scenes and then scenes come in and they contradict sort of how you're playing a scene or the information you have when you're talking to somebody, it's a big deal, you know, so you want to feel pretty confident in a story. And usually, I mean, sometimes it's the night before because you start getting jammed, you know, you're halfway through a season and scripts aren't, you know, that's when you really, it gets pretty crazy because you naturally get behind. It's not unusual. It doesn't mean people aren't professional. It's just sort of the buildup, the accumulation of what needs to be done.
And in your case, you can't be like, someone's got to talk to the producer about
yes,
this. Oh,
exactly.
wait, that's me.
Wait a minute. But you are, and you have to be flexible. You have to be nimble. I think the more you learn lines, the more able you are. It comes more easily to absorb lines quickly. But I spent a lot of last season and the season before, and even on other television shows and movies. You get a scene late the night before, and it's your job to not be tired and to learn those lines or be tired. And when the camera rolls, you still, you know, there are other people that do things that ask a lot of them, and they're tired, and they're jobs that require, you know, all sorts of things that are really hard. There are worse things.
So you do it.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
You know, we're joking about your role as producer and your role as an actor, but how do you decide which hat you're wearing when? And is that ever strange?
It always is clear where, you know, who I'm supposed to be when. I just think it's still, I think there are still sort of some old-fashioned conventions about a woman and an actor, and ideas that sort of are projected on you, even from the most evolved, or what they might consider themselves the most evolved. I think that the hardest part is not knowing when I'm supposed to be who, or what discipline I'm supposed to be kind of carrying out. But more, I think it even still, it feels a little bit hard for some people to accept an actor in a position where they get to be part of the conversation and part of the production side. And sometimes it's more difficult than others, and sometimes it can even be difficult with your female colleagues, which is always surprising to me. But you know, we can feel this. I mean female colleagues that are producers, you know, that who are singularly that. And it's not out of malice or like a desire to diminish. I feel like it's still old-fashioned ideas that are just hard. Everybody's having a hard time shaking some stuff right now. This just is the period that we are all in. And I think that that is on the fringes of it.
Yeah.
But it's my job to not be intimidated by that, or to apologize, like be meek, you know, in my contributions, because I want to be liked. I don't want someone to think I'm difficult or a diva or domineer. Like you know, it's
How
funny.
exhausting.
It can be exhausting.
No, really, that sounds exhausting.
It can be, but this is a show I care about a lot, and I'm not going to retreat. So you have to find a way. All of us in all of our jobs, whether they're in this industry or any place else, and I talk to my son about this all the time. You have to read rooms. You have to understand people. You have to know Kenny. You guys know Kenny Lonergan, the great screenwriter, right? He's been my husband's best friend since they were little boys. And Kenny is such an interesting person, and he is just a bitter ender. This guy does not give up on anything. And years ago, before he was a big famous screenwriter, he was reading this book called Getting to Yes. And I just thought it was so funny. We thought it was such a funny title. But the truth is, we're all trying to get to yes.
Yeah.
But in doing so, you have to recognize that you're dealing with human beings, you know, and everybody needs to arrive at yes you want people to happily arrive at yes, is my point.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, maybe my approach is more exhausting, but I'm just not a hammer. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I want to maintain relationships and friendships. And so sometimes it's a little bit more complicated than just laying it down.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I think that makes sense. It sounds like you're saying there are people who still have a hard time accepting a certain kind of direction or opinion potentially from an actor. And it does sound like you're saying that is probably more difficult for an actor who happens to be female.
Correct.
Than male.
I do believe that. And I'm not bitter about it. I just recognize that has been my experience. I think it's generational.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's cultural. And I suspect that this will not be the case for much longer.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears. And I see a lot of women in the audience, so I'm sure you have questions about that. I want to take it back a little bit to earlier in your career. Very early, I think you made your Broadway debut when you were 11. So I suppose the sort of typical question would be, when did you first know you wanted to act? But I'm actually more curious about whether there were ever times when you didn't want to act.
Yeah, I think up until I was, well, I grew up in Cincinnati from 5 years old to 11 years old, Cincinnati, Ohio, and it just was a very fertile artistic time in that city, and remained that way for a number of years after we left the city. But I was lucky in that we had a very well thought of regional theater called the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park. We had a ballet company, the Cincinnati Ballet Company, which was renowned across the country. We had a very famous Philharmonic led by a very famous conductor, Thomas Shipper. So this was a really exciting time creatively and artistically in our city. And as a result, my parents took us to the theater all the time, to the ballet, to the symphony. We had a beautiful, still do, museum. And by the way, for free, because in those days, the government subsidized families and children being exposed to the arts. So I was like, the minute that I saw people on stage, I was just transported, much in the same way books were for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that it was a vocation. I didn't consider, someday. I just knew that I was happy and occupied. And in school, I didn't feel that. I wasn't a great student. So the first opportunity that came my way to try to be part of that imaginary life was like the gateway to everything I wanted. So it was just fortuitous. So it was around 8 years old. So I guess I spent the first 8 years not knowing what I wanted to be, except that I liked stories other than my own.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something very healing about being in someone else's story, right?
Yeah, and it also takes you to other places. You can be perfectly happy living your own life. It doesn't characterize you as miserable, but in your own existence, I think it's a sort of particular curiosity that lets you travel elsewhere, and if you have a sort of wanderlust for the world, like that in ways you can't express, especially when you're little, and you get to be somebody else and imagine somebody else's story and their challenges or their their whatever. It's healing, but I think it's also like nourishment.
And it sounds like for you, so much of it goes back to curiosity, right? Like curiosity
Definitely.
about other people's lives and other paths.
Yeah, definitely.
So many women my age feel like they grew up with your characters and your roles. I could do an entire panel on square pegs if anyone would ever like to come to that.
I could do that.
Yes, please. And then, of course, Sex and the City. And but I think, one of the things I thought was interesting in hearing about your choice to return to TV with Divorce was that you said that it was actually doing a stage play, the Amanda Peet play, The Commons of Pensacola.
Yeah.
you loved it
Yeah.
and you immersed yourself in it, and it kind of reminded you of something you wanted to experience again.
Yeah, Amanda Peet, the actress, is a great writer, and she has written a number of plays actually, and she just had one last year that I didn't get to see, but she's a very gifted writer, and she wrote this play called The Commons of Pensacola, and Lynn Meadow, who has been the artistic director of Manhattan Theater Club for, I don't know, 40 some years, I think, asked me to, did I want to do it? And I love this play, and I hadn't been on stage in so many years, and I was terrified, but yeah, it really reminded me of what I love about It really reminded me of what I love about acting, and theater, I think, has that. It can do that in a very specific way because it is such an actor's medium. It's there's a process before it is yours, but when it is yours, once you get past opening night, and you're in a run, and even if it's a short run, it is only yours. It's the most extraordinary time to be the period to be an actor is when you're on stage because not because you're being like delinquent and doing something you're not supposed to do, but really it's the time that you really start discovering. It's such a perfect experience as an actor.
When you say because it's yours, meaning like, the performance is all yours. There's no
The director
editing
is gone.
gonna,
Correct.
Yeah.
The director has done their job, and they typically move on to their next play. The writer is no longer there checking in. You have a production stage manager who's keeping track and watching over the show and making sure you're, behaving and the show's not getting too long or too short. And and they call the cues, and they're sort of the godmother or godparent of a show. But it's all yours. There's nobody editing. For better or worse, it is your performance every single night, and it is a very living organism because you can't count on it. You can have a great show one night, and I don't know if it was Blythe Danner or somebody else that said, you're really lucky if you come out of 8 performances a week and one that you feel really good about because they're so like amorphous.
Wow.
They're like beyond, because you're reliant upon all these other it's just so fantastic.
And then when you do have that, when you're like, oh yeah, Tuesday, it was
Yeah.
all about Tuesday. Can
Everybody
you put your
knows.
finger on why it went right and how to
I think
recreate
because
it, or no?
everything feels satisfied, everything feels touched on, everything feels you feel such contentment. I'd imagine that like for a baseball player, it's like that sound when you've hit the ball exactly how you want to. It doesn't mean that anybody else knows about it because what inevitably you'll come off stage and be like, oh, I had a horrible show, and then someone will come backstage and will be like, oh my God, that was great, and you're like, God, what I'm or the opposite, which is terribly disappointing.
It happens.
And that happens too. But it's such a, I think it's feeling that you've really done right by this character and these people and this writer. And the reason you wanted to do the play is because you loved it and you imagined what it could be. And every now and then, it feels like what you imagined.
Oh, that's such a nice way of putting it. You said that before you did that, you were terrified. What specifically were you terrified of?
Oh, gosh, everything. I mean, really, people's criticisms, critics, first of all, let me just be honest. The New York Times. I mean, what is any actor on stage worried about getting through, which is Critics Week? It's just, for some reason, it's awful. And it changes the tone. It's like sort of an alternate universe exists where you're doing your best version of your best self, but you're sort of removed from the process because and particularly in a small house, you're really aware. You would like to be above it and beyond it and pretend you don't care and you don't need them and none of it matters. But you'd like the work to be recognized warmly. And I think just anybody who's willing to be honest, that particular week is really harrowing. And it's just not pleasant. It's actually not pleasant. And it's weird because up until that point, if you're given enough time to preview, that's when you're just starting to feel good. And then this week happens and no one talks about it, but we all know, and it's just terrifying.
Yeah.
But it's the gauntlet. I mean, that's unfortunate. If that's our cross to bear, so be it. It's the beauty is surviving it, and that you do survive it, even when you're disappointed and even when they're wrong,
Which happens. You're mentioning, this idea that people say like, oh, we're not going to think about the critics. But with social media, I think it's become much more difficult to tune out if you're starting out in any profession, but certainly in acting, and you're cultivating a social media presence, as everybody is generally advised to do, for better or worse, it's become much more difficult to tune out other people's ideas of you. And you have a great Instagram presence, and you seem very much yourself there. How have you learned to negotiate, being present there and being real while not letting it make you mental?
I'm not sure I have. I mean, I try. I mean, I don't think I come naturally to it at all. I think, I don't know, some people really do think they enjoy it mostly. I think what I'm comfortable with is when I can get into a real exchange. Like anytime I post a picture of a book, I feel really in safe territory, because that is a conversation that there are no rights, there's no wrong, it's not political, it's not, and I'm not avoiding politics and controversy. I just don't want to have everything be turned into that, because it just is really, I don't have the constitution for it, frankly. So I guess what I try to do is I don't engage in it a lot. Like I don't check it a lot. But when I post something, I kind of like I like answering comments, and I like when I can learn something from somebody else, or convey my gratitude, or be happy that was a book that they liked, or. But I still think that it is the potential for the potential for cruelty is stunning. Like it's as though there is still this like kind of villainous delight in like finding a way to be mean. Like I
Anonymously.
I did something so it felt so benign. It was nothing, and I don't even know why I did it. It's not even like me. I never post like selfies or pictures of anything. I don't like to do that stuff, but so I'll do it for
It's okay
work
to
or
post
whatever.
a selfie.
But no, I'm not good at it. But then I was getting a haircut, and I just like posted some pictures of like some old hair that had cut off my head. Like it was like people were like, "Oh, what makes you think that is interesting? Meaningless. Like who cares about your hair?" And I was like, "Nobody." But I see everybody else do it. So I'm like, I thought like it felt like, oh, this is actually the most like.
So you're agreeing with your mean commenter?
No, I was like, no, but I was like, it didn't seem, it seemed nothing when they did it too. Like, I wasn't trying to say like, everybody pay attention to my hair, I just cut, or that like, they were like, what did they use? They had the
I think I liked
craziest
that picture of
words.
yours,
I was
by the
like,
way.
"Oh, you're so self-important." And I was like, no, in fact, no, it's like, if self-important would have been like a whole thing on it, like, I don't know. It just didn't feel, it felt like nothing. It felt like me actually trying to be like everybody else. Like, I was like, yeah, I've seen that. People do like, hey, I'm getting a haircut. And I can't even explain it. It was just like, I was just like, what of all things? Just dead hair. Like, it was nothing anyway. You can see I have a relationship that I'm working on.
It's
with
complicated.
It. Yeah, it's complicated. But I do like talking to other people, and I do like when we talk about things that are about life. That I really do like. I've gotten some great book titles, recipes. People share lives out their stories and their children, and I like that.
Right.
Yeah. I do.
Well, yes, and I think it's perfectly valid to post hair pictures and
Never
selfies,
again.
and it's great
First
that
of all,
you
I'm never
figured
getting a
out.
haircut again, and then I'm certainly never gonna. No, I'm kidding.
Back to divorce for a second. One of the things that I really enjoy about the show is the relationship between Frances and her not one female friend, as is in the case in most TV shows, but two.
I know. And I almost had 3.
Really?
Well, Sylvia, I
Oh,
thought she
yeah.
was going to be my friend.
Oh, no, sorry.
I
That didn't end
know.
well.
I'm going to try to get her back.
Ooh, hello, season 3. And I'm curious whether that just sort of came naturally. You know, you got a lot of women in the writers' room and female producers, obviously, or whether it was something that you actually talked about.
I think from the beginning, Sharon was interested in that. She wrote our pilot script, and I think she really liked that and wanted, I think, for Frances to have female friendships that weren't typical, also that were based on some surprising ways of connecting, and we all loved it. And obviously Molly joining us was just such a coup that you want to, if there's any sort of shortcoming, I think it's that I wish we had had more time together. I wish there had been better, deeper, I don't mean better, but just simply more stories with Diana and Dallas and Frances. And that would be the thing that I would really push more for in a 3rd season, is because the relationships would change. They're all single potentially now, and what does that mean? They're all very different. There's no reason in some ways. Sometimes I look at those friendships and they don't really make any sense to me. Diana and Frances don't really make sense. Do you know what I mean? So I would like to figure out what they are and how they can be better friends to one another, and what is it like for the 3 of them to now be single in Hastings? You know what I mean? And because I think that's real, and I think that was one of the things that I was most interested about originally. It was what does it mean to be single at this point in your life when you've spent your entire adult life being a partner to somebody and a parent. So that's very different, and the world looks different. And with New York City sitting just south, beckoning, what is that? So I hope that there's, if we end up doing a 3rd season, I really hope that a lot of that time is spent with those women, and I love them.
I would watch an entire show just about that.
Oh, I would happily. I would love them.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about New York City and the idea of Westchester, versus.
See now. That's a good song. Don't worry
Is that
about
Men
it.
at
Don't
Work?
worry about it.
I like it. Bring it back to the 80s. Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Forget the New York City. We'll get to that if there's time later. One of the things that
It's okay. You're a popular man. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Who can it be now?
Do you want to take a second? Okay. Don't worry. Don't worry. It's okay. It's okay.
One of the things I think I heard you cite when you first started talking about divorce as an inspiration was Jill Clayburgh's role in An Unmarried Woman.
Yeah.
What was it specifically? You and I might be the only 2 people in this room who have seen that movie. Other
You guys-
people? Okay, good.
God, I love that movie.
Good.
She's way up there. Woo.
What was it specifically that you liked?
Well, I love everything about that movie. I love her performance, and I did see that movie originally when it came out. My parents took me, and I was extremely young.
Wow.
I know, it was very
Mine
odd.
wouldn't take me.
We used to go see movies in January. It was like a big deal. We would go see. I guess now I'm realizing what were probably the Oscar movies. Even in Cincinnati, we had a great theater, first-run theater. So the family would go, whether it was appropriate or not, and that was one of the movies. And I think it was very important in my mind and in my mind's eye, because cinematically, I just loved the way that movie looked. And I think it was, a seminal movie about being single at a particular age, and especially when you don't expect it. Jill Clayburgh discovers this, that her marriage is falling apart in a most unexpected way, as you guys all recall. I mean, it's that great scene on the East River with her vomiting, or him. Does he vomit? No, she does. She does. And it's just, and what she goes through, and there's this change that comes over her. I really think she, she really does start off in that movie as somebody's wife. And what she becomes is very much an independent woman. The great performance by Lisa Lucas, who played her daughter, the production design, which was divine, the clothing, that great shrink.
The clothing is amazing.
And that amazing image of her carrying that painting down those canyons of Soho.
How many times have you seen this movie?
A lot. But that 70s cinema was a huge inspiration when we were, when I was thinking about this show originally. And even as the script came in from Sharon, I really wanted to push for music, for real source music from the 70s, and to try to shoot in the way that they used to. But Jill Clayburgh's performance, I think, was, I hadn't seen anything like that on television since. There's lots of ways of talking about marriage and family and divorce, and lots of people do it and do it well. But HBO hadn't really told this story this way, and I knew that they would allow us to do that. And it seemed like a really nice opportunity.
It's actually curious that it was missing from television, given that it is such an incredibly common female experience in the 21st century.
Yeah, more and more so. And women more and more are making the choice to divorce, at especially in their 50s. Like, it's very interesting to me how many women are choosing. And a lot of it has to do with the time in which they had children earlier than I did. So they're at a certain point in their life, and they've invested a really nice amount into their families and often into their husbands and their children. And they've often been maybe even the breadwinner. So this choice is so interesting to me. And though Jill Clayburgh wasn't in that position, because we were not ready as a country to flip it that way.
Right.
There is a huge thing that happens to her in that movie.
When you played Carrie on Sex and the City, people were constantly getting Carrie Bradshaw and Sarah Jessica Parker mixed up, right?
Yeah,
They thought you were just
sure.
sort of playing yourself with your own great, fabulous wardrobe.
Sure.
Which is great, but has that started to happen at all with Frances?
No, but one more thing on Instagram, I will say, people have been so great about the costume designer on our show, and they've really loved, so that's a nice, comfortable, that's like a safe area.
The dresses.
The dresses are amazing.
Dresses are great.
They're amazing, as is our music. Our music supervisor is equally amazing. So we have this great costume designer named Arjun I never pronounce his name correctly. He was our costume designer on the first season, and then he started off, and then we also have another gentleman, Joseph LaCourte, who came in, and we all just saw it the same way. I mean, it was so wonderful because when we were meeting with designers, I didn't want to kind of like lead the witness, but Arjun came in and he immediately was like, it should be 70s dresses, but we shouldn't do 70s because it's not a period piece. It would look odd, so we'll just comb thrift stores. So everything I wear is from the thrift store or vintage shop. Everything.
Wow.
Everything. Most of the coats, there's a couple of coats that he found at Century 21, but my shoes are used.
What about the little vintage, they're Coach bags, right? Aren't
Those
they?
are all
Some of
off
them?
Etsy.
They're incredible.
Yeah, and he would go in his van up and down the Eastern Seaboard. There's great thrift shops in Philadelphia. We have great thrift shops in our city, but they tend to get picked over a lot, and they tend to be more costly. But I would just go on Etsy and just like pull dresses.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's how I shop anyway.
Yeah.
So
It's true. You wear a lot of vintage, don't you?
Yeah.
So that idea though of people confusing
But
you
yeah,
with
they
Carrie.
don't. Sorry, yeah, they don't as much, and I think they don't as much anymore even about Carrie. I think
Well, maybe divorce got rid of that for them.
maybe a little bit, but I think also, I'm around still. I'm alive. So I think the longer I'm alive,
You are.
the longer I'm alive as me, she gets as much equal time as Carrie. Me. But I know we look alike, Carrie and I. I get that, and I look like Frances, and I get that too. But I do think also that it's kind of an association that is not burdensome. So if that were the only way people identified with me, it would be at the privilege of my life. But also, I think there's a kind of sentimental thing and a nostalgia that I too feel. So it doesn't feel misunderstood, if that makes sense.
It does. I see a lot of people here who are, probably at a relatively early point in their career, and I'm curious if you could go back and give some words of counsel to yourself at an earlier age, what they would be. I mean, think of sort of, pre-Sex in the City, Sarah Jessica Parker.
I guess the thing that I've settled on in answer to this question, because for so long I didn't have any, I didn't know what to say. But I guess I would just say to not let anyone else's opinion of you be your opinion of yourself. And that, I think, is a very hard thing to do when you're young. Like, you're most vulnerable when you're young because there's so much good that comes from listening to other people. And also their counsel from people who have more experience, who are older, who have been living and in a profession longer. It makes good sense, I think, to try to get as much information. But there is a difference between kind of words of mentorship and words that have nothing to do with sort of fundamentally, like, if I had listened to everybody's ideas about who I should be, I think I wouldn't have had the experiences that I've enjoyed professionally that have been meaningful to me. And the things people might have advised me to do that for some reason I had enough, I don't know, I wouldn't call it confidence, but I had enough gumption to simply not agree with in some way. Weird things. Some of it's superficial and some of it's more meaningful than that.
What are there any that you want to share, things that you remember?
Oh God, like dress differently, pluck your eyebrows, have a nose job, go appear different, like in auditions, but I couldn't do that. Like, I actually, it's not that I wasn't vain or am not still. I am, all that's real, but I ultimately couldn't make that choice. Like, I had to have some belief that the things that I wanted for myself, the things that I imagined were possible without, without compromising in ways that I didn't have 100% confidence in. Like, I had more confidence in my cockeyed optimism about what could be than I ultimately had in someone else's idea of what I should be in order to be successful.
Yes.
But it wasn't that clear at the time. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like, wait a minute, that's this and this is this. And so if I do that, 2 and 2 will equal. It wasn't that. I just ultimately wasn't willing to make those choices.
Right. Well, good for you. I
Thanks.
love that.
It worked out.
We're going to go to a few audience questions for a second. I could keep asking you my own questions all afternoon, but I think we may have just covered, this was a question from Martina Jerf.
Hi, Martina.
Hi, Martina. I actually think we may just have answered your question, which was what acting advice would you like to give to aspiring actors? Focusing on acting itself.
I would say, there's so much, but part of me thinks that it's a hard thing to be an actor when you don't get to be hired as an actor. I think it's really hard and it's really frustrating. Like, it's a genuine source of real frustration and can be, it feels lousy, frankly, when you're not working. But what I used to do that felt kind of good was I would just try to read plays all the time out loud to myself. I would just read books out loud so that I felt like I was working on something. And it made me feel useful. It made me feel like I was in the pursuit of. I was working on whatever skills I had. I didn't take acting classes because I think I'd started working too young. So then I was scared to take acting classes. I was like, oh, they'll figure me out. And then they'll be like, what? But I think, trying to see as much theater as you can, I think is really good for actors. Even offering to usher, anytime you can get into a space where people are doing work that you admire, I think is great. But I also think you can find scene partners and work with friends and do stuff, like create work, because I think it's the hardest thing. A writer can always write, But an actor really wants to feel, you want to be hired, you want to be called upon. And I just think there are ways that you can fill that time. And just know that all that auditioning, that's good too. Like that really adds up. You're welcome. You're welcome.
The next question is from Stephen Lynn. Oh, hi.
Oh, what?
We're just going to
you
work
guys
our way
together?
through the entire house.
Oh, we worked together on Two Dope Queens. Oh, you were the brunch guy. Oh my gosh. Well, you forgive me. I was so nervous. I wouldn't. There was so much food. It was, yes. Oh my God. Nice to see you. Oh, nice to see you. Oh, thank you. That's very nice.
So Brunch Guy has a question. At what point did you feel like a professional actor?
I think probably when I was living on my own. I was about just 18, and I was doing a play. I'd actually come home from I had finished Square Pegs and I did Footloose, but I had been a minor in the state of California. I had yet to turn 18, and on the very last part of the season of Square Pegs, I turned 18. Then I went off and I did Footloose. But when I came home to New York City, I was still living at home with my parents, and I just never unpacked my suitcase. Came home from Utah where we shot Footloose, and I was just like, nope, not doing it. And I found an apartment in New York, and then I got a play, this beautiful play called To Jillian on her 37th birthday. And it was this original play. It was before it was a movie. We were going to do it at EST, which is over on 52nd Street. That's a great thing to do, or the one acts there. And it was part of their kind of season. And I was coming home on the subway after a performance one night, and I got off on the one train at 72nd and Columbus, or 72nd and Broadway, and I actually saw Elizabeth McGovern. She was an actress just slightly my senior, and no, I'm just really genuinely coughing because she's like barely my senior, but in my head she was like, moving. She was like just experiencing things that I was working toward. But for some reason, I was like, wow, I'm an actor. I am actually doing what she's doing. I'm hired. I'm on my own. I'm paying my own Con Ed bills, and I'm working really hard. And I'm proud of the work that I'm doing, even if nobody else knows about it. I don't care, because this is exactly this is it. This is complete in some way.
Our next question is from Lisa Thornbloom. Lisa? Oh, hi. You have beautiful handwriting, by the way. What was the most helpful note you ever received from a director?
Oh, boy.
Or least helpful, if you want to answer that.
I've gotten some good notes.
Well, Lisa had two
that's
questions.
Okay.
I could ask the other.
I think the best thing is for someone to just probably tell you to don't. There's nothing, like they're not expecting something that, that there is nothing wrong. There's no wrong that can happen, I think it's really hard when you feel a director's presence and you're there, you can feel that they are waiting for something that they have. You're trying to live up to some idea that they had versus, I think a director is at their best when they're really championing the people. And they, I think, get the best work from actors. Often it's a chance to slow down. If someone says, don't worry about time. You guys take all the time you want. Just talk to each other, play the scene. Because a lot of time what people want is like, can you get to this faster? Can you move the scene faster? And television really suffers from that because it's this limited, and I think that's why actors like being on stage, because no one ever tells them to rush, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. So I think the best note really is when someone says, take your time. If we need to, we'll figure it out later.
This is a question from Charisse Matthews. Oh, hi.
Hello.
We really are working our way backward in the room here. You've been acting for years and portrayed many characters. What do you enjoy more, film, TV, or theater? And Charisse wants you to know that she enjoyed Comments of Pensacola, which is the Amanda Peet
Thanks.
play we were talking about.
I kind of I like doing all of it because it's different. It's different enough for me that it feels. I like working in the theater for the reasons, I itemized earlier. I like television because I think you have an opportunity to play a life, like a whole life. You live, if you're fortunate enough to be around for a while, you really are living a life. It's bizarre and wonderful. And television uniquely gives you that opportunity because it's episode after episode and the character grows and changes. And film because it still is this sort of crown jewel in your brain. It doesn't exist in maybe that way anymore because there's so much that's cinematic happening on television, and now the screen size is kind of whatever you want to have in your home. But I think there's still this idea about making a movie, and what does that mean? And I think movies are really important still, even though there's so much good work happening on television and there's so many platforms to tell stories. I think there is still something pretty extraordinary about leaving your house and sitting in a space with other people and having a really big screen and beautiful sound and having things visually really be important enough to get you out of your house and keep you seated there. So I like all of it.
We were talking a little bit about gender and female directors before, and the statistics on female directors in film are pretty dismal. There was a big study that came out last month that found that of the top 1,100 films of the last decade, only 4% were directed by women.
Yeah.
And the numbers are better, not fantastic,
No.
but significally better in TV. One of the things that I thought was interesting is that when women do direct a project, it's 37% more likely to have a female lead, and that female lead is much more likely, or female characters in general are more likely to have jobs, make jokes, stay alive, not get killed in the first 20 minutes.
Right.
I would think if I were a woman trying to get into the business of being an actor, I would want to look in television versus film. Is that fair? Are we just giving up on film?
No, I think it's fair. I don't think we're giving up, but I think I don't think there's ever any giving up on anything anymore. I think that, the conversation began, and there's just no retreating from making those changes in all mediums. But I just think there's simply more being produced television. There's just a huge amount. I mean, there are platforms of distribution now that I don't even know their names. Like, people are producing content and they're sending it out into the world. And as a result, there's just more opportunities for women, just the sheer numbers, I think when you have the success of Greta Gerwig, I mean, like that kind of story and having it recognized, and lots of other women that came before her, and filmmakers in documentaries. It's not just in the long form either that people are paying attention to. I just think everything is going to change, and we just have to allow it to take its time properly so that we aren't, what we really want, I think, is to make sure we have, the idea of 50-50 by 2020 is admirable. It's fantastic. It's inspired. But where's the pipeline? Where is the recruitment happening? So what we really want is, we want that, and we can all work toward that. But we also want to make sure that when women are given those opportunities, that they are prepared. So that means they have to have the experiences that lead up to being ready, to being qualified. And if they're not, that's our fault because we haven't reached out, we haven't recruited. I kind of, and I mean this in the best possible way, the Yankees have a farm system, and it works because they reach out and they recruit. And they get, we need to do that. And
well, you are doing that. I mean, there are a lot of female directors on season 2
We have, and we would have had more, but actually one of them took another job. So, but but
it's good she's in
we
demand.
all, yeah, it's great. But we all, we want that. But we want it not just directors. We want mixers and production designers and on-set decorators and greensmen and dolly grips. We want everything. We want hair and makeup and wardrobe. We want people up in production. We want production coordinators and location people. There's a whole host of opportunity that exists that is exciting and lucrative, and you can move up, and we need to reach out into schools and technical colleges and 2-year programs, and we got to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we have to stop there. We are out of time. Sarah Jessica Parker,
Oh,
thank you so
Cindi.
much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, you guys. Thank you.